So overall, in terms of how much we've progressed from our opening sequence, from our preliminary exercise to our opening sequence, uh, I'd say we've progressed in some areas. So the sophistication of the shots, and I've definitely learned a lot about the camera and the editing process, and particularly the tracking dolly. I mean, we used a lot of shots that we definitely couldn't or didn't use in our preliminary task. So the tracking dolly being one of them. It's very simple shots in our preliminary exercise, but we tried to go for more complex ones. In this shot, first establishing shot establishes the character, or more than one character, our main character here. Uh, this shot was done from a car, so I think we definitely were more complex, and that was thanks to knowledge that we had gained. We definitely had better knowledge going into the second one, or going into our opening sequence rather. The how to use titles. I think this one is definitely a more sophisticated piece in terms of the correct media, or I say correct, the preliminary exercise had correct media for the most part, but I mean more sophisticated, better quality media things were used. So titles and uh, variation in shots and more sophisticated filming, and we learned all this thanks to the preliminary exercise where we were doing it on quite a small scale, but we were a bit more advanced in doing our actual opening sequence. And the titles in this one are very good. Uh, the the handheld camera, that's another thing we experimented with in this, and I think on the whole we can be quite pleased with this. But I think we have to look at our opening sequence, preliminary exercise, and then our opening sequence, and say that actually, though it's a bit more sophisticated and there's more nuance, and you know, there's more conventions in terms of a narrative. I think our preliminary exercise was far better because it established things much quicker, and I think overall it was more engaging. I don't think we managed to make our opening sequence engaging enough. It looked quite boring and dull at times, or just it didn't feel like a party, or not something that the audience would be overly surprised by. Whereas I think our preliminary exercise was really good at keeping the audience's attention because of our mise en scene and our fluctuation of shots. Okay, it was only 42 seconds, but there was a clear plot there. The clear plot was that there was no plot, but we knew that there was a sense of anxiety, and I think the simplicity is better. I think that's what I've learned throughout doing this whole process, is that maybe simplicity pays off more than trying to organize a big thing like we did in our opening sequence. And it definitely shows, I think, because we definitely had if you apply it to narrative theory, we had our preliminary exercise, we had equilibrium with our establishing shot, and then straight away we broke that equilibrium. Remember, it's only 42 seconds, so we broke that equilibrium with, well, you could say right from the start, or if you want to say the equilibrium breaking point was when one of the characters enters the room where the other character is, and then you could say that the new equilibrium is the joke at the end, which reassures the audience that actually everything is fine. It's just a bit of a joke, and it's a comedy. It establishes our genre. I think in our one it was quite hard in our opening sequence. It was quite hard to follow what was going on. We established a lot of things. We tried to establish a lot of things, but I think we ended up trying to establish too many things. And our mise en scene here is no inferior, especially in this shot here. The mise en scene is no inferior to the mise en scene that we've used for the preliminary exercise. Even over here, I think the lighting is fantastic. The lighting is completely different to this room, suggesting something different is going to happen. There's a bit more romantic again over here. Establishes the door. We know exactly what's going to happen. It's suggesting this shot of the door. Very good. These close up. So we established lots of things. I mean, the middle scene, there's not much difference over here. I think it's the things that we were trying to represent with the mise-en-scene. I think we struggled a bit with that because we had to represent things. I think there's a clearer genre. I think we had to stick to the genre in our opening sequence, and I think we just tried to do too much. I think we were overwhelmed by it. Whereas I think we had too much freedom maybe, and we were experimenting a bit too much with the camera and the editing, etc., etc. But in terms of there's other bits where we definitely drastically improved. Where if we're going to sound is definitely much better. The dialogue at the start is markedly better than the dialogue that we see in our preliminary task, and so is the soundtrack. The use of the soundtrack definitely helps our opening sequence. It kind of holds it all together, and although there's various shots, there's that continuing theme throughout. So I think that really helps. That's one thing that we've definitely improved on, and we've learned that actually the use of sound is a bit more important than it's given credit for, and simple dialogue won't be enough. Another thing that I think is important to realize is that the opening sequence, I think we tried to definitely achieve too much, whereas with our preliminary task we had a set limitation of 45 seconds, and it was one simple task of 2 characters in a room. And we still played about with our choice of shots, but there was less pressure on sticking to one genre. And I think because there was less pressure of sticking to one genre, we managed to stick to one genre without getting engrossed into it and thinking purely about that. I think in our opening sequence, I think we've been guilty of that, of trying to do too many representations and trying to be too experimental with some of our shots. Whereas in the opening sequence, I think we had it perfect because there was not that pressure. And some of these shots, like this one here, we just wanted to establish character, and I think maybe it didn't come out as good as it would have if we weren't knowing that we had to establish our character. I don't think it quite makes sense, or I can quite explain it, but if it makes a little, then I'll be happy. But overall, I think we've learned that, or I definitely have learned that from our preliminary, that it's definitely better to stick to simple ideas. Sometimes simple ideas are better than going out of your way to try to do complicated things, because overcomplicating things is never desirable, to be honest. In our opening sequence, that is exactly what we try to do, and I think that's why maybe it's not as effective as it could be, and it's not as enjoyable for viewers to audiences to receive. It just doesn't engage me as much as the preliminary task does. And that's one thing that I've learned, is that simplicity is the key. I keep saying it again and again because I've definitely learned that. But that said, I think the editing is definitely very good in our opening sequence. I've learned that editing can actually transform a piece, because I think the filming that we took wasn't particularly great or engaging, but the editing definitely does make it more watchable, and it gives it some sort of narrative and background, and etc., etc., and establishes a mood. I think the titles are quite good. That's one thing that we didn't do in our preliminary, and we learned that I think our preliminary would have been even better with the titles, or maybe not as if it's a comedy sketch, but there are some good things in there. We can see a lot of development in our opening sequence from our preliminary, but overall I would say that the preliminary is more enjoyable to watch, and I think that's the one regret that I have, and that's the thing that I'll take away from the whole process is that uh, simplicity is key. Instead of overcomplicating and going for grand ideas, simplicity will do the trick, and all of these shots of hair from our opening sequence are testament to that. I think we're just trying to establish too much rather than have a simple storyline, a narrative, and something that viewers would want to look at. But I can say I've definitely learned a lot, and the opening sequence that we have come up with to produce a film of 2 minutes, which you could say the preliminary didn't have. It was only 42 seconds long, so there wasn't that much pressure on the time. Who knows, if we had to make a preliminary with 2 minutes, it might not have been as successful as it was in terms of those aspects that I've covered, the mise-en-scene, etc. But now that it's quite important to look at the opening sequence and see the developments there, because I've learned a lot, and it's much better edited together. The editing is much better in terms of the continuity and the fast cut or quick change of shots. I think these look much more sophisticated in our opening sequence than they do in the preliminary task. The only thing that's missing really is a narrative, or a clear, engaging narrative. And I can definitely say that there are a lot of improvements from our preliminary to this. The only regret I have is that we maybe overcomplicated it a bit. That's the only issue really. But overall, I've definitely learned a lot from this process. I enjoyed making. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed making the preliminary task, uh, as well as this one.